The first thing to register was the sound, a keening, desperate wail that sliced through the twilight haze. It was a siren, but from her side of the gurney, lying on the damp, cool grass of her own front lawn, it sounded alien, distorted. It seemed to come from miles away and from inside her own skull at the same time. The second thing was the smell, a nauseating cocktail of freshly cut grass, earthy soil, and the hot, coppery tang of her own blood. It was a scent she knew intimately from the ER, the smell of trauma. But it was never supposed to be her trauma. It was never supposed to be on her lawn. The third thing was the pressure, a frantic, wet lapping against her cheek, accompanied by a low, guttural whine. Rex, her boy. His big, intelligent eyes were wide with a terror she had never seen in them before, not even in the darkest pictures her brother had sent from Afghanistan. He was safe. That was the only thought that managed to form a coherent shape in the swirling chaos of her mind. He's safe. A face swam into her vision, blocking out the purple-orange sky. Her neighbor, Tom, his face pale and slick with sweat. His mouth was moving, but the siren swallowed the words. He was pressing a wad of kitchen towels against her back, and the sudden, sharp agony that lanced through her body made her gasp. The world tilted violently. Stabbed 6 times! Tom's voice finally broke through the noise, a frantic shout into the phone he had pressed to his ear. Yes, my neighbor. She was shielding her dog. 6. The number echoed in the cavern of her skull. She'd felt the impacts, the brutal, percussive rhythm of the attack. But hearing the number spoken aloud gave it a terrifying finality. She had thrown herself between Rex and the flashing blade, a purely instinctual act born of a 2-year-old promise to a ghost. Her body had become a shield that had been breached, again and again. Her vision tunneled. The last thing she saw before the darkness consumed her was Rex's magnificent head, his ears flat against his skull, his body a trembling, loyal sentinel over hers. Her last thought was not of the pain, or the fear, or the man who had done this. It was a simple, silent message sent out into the ether, to a brother who could no longer hear her. I kept him safe, Michael. I kept him safe. It had all started, as the most catastrophic events often do, with the mundane. A Tuesday evening in late spring, the kind of evening that suburban dreams are made of. The air in Oak Meadows, Virginia, was thick with the scent of jasmine and honeysuckle, and the rhythmic thwump 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 of automatic sprinklers was the neighborhood's gentle heartbeat. Sarah Jenkins, 32 years old and feeling every minute of it, pulled her 10-year-old sedan into the driveway of her modest 2-story home. The house was more than she needed, but it had a yard, and a yard was non-negotiable. She unbuckled her seatbelt and let her head fall back against the headrest, her eyes closing for a blissful 60 seconds. The preceding 12 hours in the county hospital's emergency room had been a blur of chest pains, broken bones, and the relentless, tragic symphony of beeping monitors and worried voices. She was a vessel of practiced empathy, pouring herself out for strangers until she felt hollowed out, an empty shell that just wanted the quiet refuge of home. The moment she opened the car door, he was there. Rex. He didn't bound or bark like other dogs. The 10-year-old Belgian Malinois, a retired Marine raider and veteran of 2 tours in Helmand Province, moved with a quiet dignity that belied the formidable power coiled in his lean frame. He stood at the door to the garage, his tail giving 2 slow, deliberate wags. His amber eyes, flecked with the wisdom of a life she could only imagine, met hers. He was her anchor. Hey, buddy, she murmured, her voice raspy. She dropped her bag and scratched him behind his satellite dish ears. Did you hold down the fort? He leaned into her touch, a low rumble of contentment in his chest. Inside, Sarah shed the day like a second skin. Scrubs went into the hamper, a quick shower washed away the sterile smell of the hospital, and she slipped into worn leggings and a faded t-shirt. With a tall glass of iced tea in hand, she and Rex went into the backyard. This was her ritual, her decompression chamber. The world and its endless emergencies could wait. For 15 minutes, she was just a woman in her yard with her dog. Rex didn't play fetch or chase squirrels, he patrolled. He would make a slow, methodical circuit of the yard's perimeter, his nose twitching, before settling on the grass near her patio chair, always facing outward, always on watch. He was a piece of her brother, Michael, made warm and real and furry. He was a living, breathing testament to a love that death could not extinguish. You see anything out there, big guy? She asked, propping her feet up. Rex's ears swiveled toward the back fence, His posture didn't change, but a new stillness came over him. A sentinel's focus. Sarah sighed. She knew what that meant. "Just ignore him, Rex," she said softly. But it was too late. Darren Croft's florid, angry face appeared over the top of the 6-foot privacy fence. He was a man in his late 40s who seemed perpetually aggrieved by the world, a storm cloud of resentment looking for a place to reign. "Can you get your attack dog under control?" Croft snarled, his voice a low-grade chainsaw. "He's been staring at my house for 10 minutes. It's menacing." Sarah took a slow, calming breath, the one she used before delivering bad news to a family in the ER. "Hello, Darren. He's not doing anything. He's just sitting here." "He's plotting," Croft shot back, his eyes bugging slightly. "I know his kind. Vicious. Unpredictable. You shouldn't be allowed to have an animal like that in a family neighborhood." This wasn't their first run-in. Croft had complained about Rex barking one single woof at a passing garbage truck. He had complained about the dog smell when the wind blew just so. He had filed a formal complaint with the Oak Meadows Homeowners Association, a document Sarah had received with a mixture of disbelief and contempt. "He's a highly trained retired service animal," Sarah said, her voice even but firm. "He is calmer and better behaved than most of the people in this neighborhood. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're trying to have a quiet evening." She turned slightly in her chair, a clear dismissal. It was a mistake. To a man like Croft, being ignored was a greater offense than being insulted. "Don't you turn your back on me, you smug little." The rest of the insult was lost in a furious grunt. Sarah heard the scrape of shoes on wood and turned back just in time to see Darren Croft, his face a mask of purple rage, scrambling over the fence into her yard. It was such a shocking violation of space and reason that for a second she couldn't process it. In his hand was a flash of silver, a utility knife, its blade extended. Rex was on his feet in an instant, a low, rumbling growl starting deep in his chest. He didn't lunge, he didn't bark, he simply stood his ground, a furry shield between his human and the threat. "I'll shut that mutt up for good," Croft screamed, his voice cracking. He lunged, not at Sarah, but at the dog. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing all at once. The ER nurse in her cataloged the scene with horrifying clarity, the trajectory of the man, the angle of the blade, the vulnerable target. The sister in her heard an echo from 2 years ago, Michael's voice on a crackling satellite call. "Take care of my partner if something happens to me, Sar. He's seen as much as I have. He's family." There was no decision. There was only instinct. Sarah launched herself from the chair. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, she was on the ground, her body curled around Rex's powerful torso, her back exposed to the attack. She tucked her head, bracing for the impact. The first blow was a hot, sharp shock just below her shoulder blade. It stole her breath. A grunt of pain escaped her lips. She tightened her grip on Rex's fur, feeling his body tense beneath hers. The second one came an instant later, lower down, near her ribs. It was deeper, a grinding, sickening tear. The third, the fourth, the fifth. A brutal, percussive rain of violence. She felt the blades snag on fabric and then sink into flesh. The world began to blur at the edges, the vibrant green of the grass turning a muddy brown. She could hear Croft's ragged, furious breathing, a sound that would be seared into her memory forever. And then, the sixth, a final, vicious stab to her upper arm as she twisted to better shield Rex's head. Suddenly, a new sound, a shout from the neighboring yard. "Hey, get off of her!" The weight was gone. The attack stopped. Sarah collapsed fully onto the grass, the world, a dizzying, tilting mess. She rolled onto her side, her body screaming in protest. Her eyes found Rex. He was unhurt, frantically nudging her face, whining with a sound of pure canine anguish. Tom from next door was wrestling a stunned Croft to the ground, his wife yelling into a phone. The details were fuzzy. The only thing that was sharp, the only thing that mattered, was the warm, solid presence of the dog beside her. The promise she had kept. 2 years, 3 months, and 6 days earlier, Sarah had stood on the cold, windswept tarmac of Dover Air Force Base, a place that felt like the edge of the world. The air was sterile, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and grief. A cavernous C-17 Globemaster sat on the runway, its open maw having just delivered its solemn cargo. She stood with her parents, a trinity of silent, shattered people, as a team of Marines in dress blues, their movements crisp and unnervingly perfect, carried the flag-draped transfer case containing the body of Sergeant Michael Jenkins. Her little brother, the boy who used to put frogs in her dollhouse, the teenager who taught her how to change a tire, the man who had found his purpose in the harshest corners of the world. An officer with a face carved from granite presented her mother with the folded flag. The geometry of it was all wrong. A flag was meant to fly, to ripple in the wind. This was a dense, heavy triangle of cloth, a folded and finished thing, just like Michael's life. Sarah didn't cry. The grief was too vast, a frozen ocean inside her chest. Crying felt like a triviality. She had always been the protector. When Michael fell out of a tree and broke his arm, she was the one who fashioned a makeshift sling from her sweatshirt and half-carried him home. When he got his heart broken for the first time, she was the one who sat with him all night, letting him rage and weep. Her choice to become an ER nurse was just an extension of that instinct to stand in the breach, to mend what was broken. But she couldn't mend this. She couldn't protect him from an IED on a dusty road halfway around the world. The guilt of that failure was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of her life. 3 months after the funeral, when the casseroles had stopped coming and the sympathy cards had been put away in a box, the phone rang. "Ma'am, this is Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole Evans," a voice rumbled, deep and steady as a ship's engine. "I was Sergeant Jenkins' unit leader." Sarah's breath caught. "Yes, Gunny. I remember you from the service. Your brother was a fine Marine, ma'am. One of the best. Brave, smart, cared about his men." There was a pause. "He talked about you a lot. The super smart ER nurse sister who always had his back." A small, painful smile touched Sarah's lips. "He was a good brother." "There's a reason I'm calling," Evans continued, his tone shifting from remembrance to business. "It's about Rex, his 9 partner. You know who I'm talking about?" "Of course," Sarah said. Michael's letters were full of stories about Rex, the brilliant, fearless Malinois who could find explosives in a sandstorm and who slept at the foot of his cot every night. "Well, Rex is being retired. The vets say he's got some stress-related issues, a little arthritis setting in. He's done his duty. The Corps likes to place these dogs with handlers or their families. Michael listed you as his next of kin, and as his primary preference for Rex's placement." Sarah was stunned into silence. A dog. A living, breathing piece of Michael's war. "Ma'am, you there?" "I'm here," she whispered. I don't know. A military dog? I live in a quiet neighborhood. I work long hours." "He's not a weapon, ma'am. He's a partner. And he's grieving, too. He lost his handler. We think he'd be better off with someone who understands. Someone who is family." A week later, she drove to a facility near Quantico. Gunny Evans met her there. He was a mountain of a man, with kind eyes that had seen too much. He led her to a kennel run. Inside, a magnificent, sable-colored dog with intelligent eyes sat silently, observing them. He was bigger than she'd imagined, all lean muscle and coiled energy. "That's him, Rex," Evans said softly. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She was afraid that looking at this dog would hurt too much, afraid that she couldn't handle the responsibility. Evans opened the kennel door. Rex walked out, not with a bound, but with a measured, deliberate gait. He stopped a few feet from Sarah and just looked at her, his head cocked. Sarah knelt down, her knees protesting. She didn't speak. She just looked back at him, letting him see the grief she knew he shared. After a long moment, Rex took a step forward, then another, until he was right in front of her. He lowered his big head and gently nudged her hand. Then he rested his muzzle on her knee and sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. In that moment, the fear vanished, replaced by a fierce, overwhelming wave of love and purpose. This wasn't a burden. This was a gift. This was her brother's last request. This was a promise she would keep. Life in Oak Meadows with Rex had been a quiet therapy for them both. His silent companionship filled the echoing spaces in her house and her heart. But their peace was not absolute. The first complaint from Darren Croft arrived via email from the HOA, forwarded by its president, Karen Thompson. Subject: Formal complaint by Law 14. C. Nuisance animals. Dear Ms. Jenkins, please be advised that a formal complaint has been filed by your neighbor, Mr. Darren Croft of 114 Willow Lane, regarding your dog. The complaint cites excessive barking, constituting a nuisance under HOA Bylaw 14.c. While we trust our residents to be responsible pet owners, we must take all complaints seriously to ensure the peace and tranquility of our community. Please ensure the animal is kept under control to avoid further action. Sincerely, Karen Thompson. President, Oak Meadows, HOA. Sarah had scoffed at the email. Excessive barking? Rex barked less than any dog she'd ever known. She'd fired back a polite but firm reply, explaining Rex's background and assuring them he was no nuisance. She'd thought that was the end of it. She never imagined that the petty grievance of a miserable man would one day leave her bleeding out on her own lawn. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room hummed a monotonous, sickly tune. Each beep from the cardiac monitor next to her bed felt like a nail being hammered into her skull. Sarah drifted in and out of a morphine-laced fog, the world a smear of white sheets, IV drips, and the hushed professional voices of her colleagues. They treated her with a gentle, sad reverence that made her feel like a ghost in her own life. Her body was a roadmap of pain. A deep, grinding ache in her back where the blade had gone deepest. A sharp, fiery protest from her shoulder every time she breathed. A dull, throbbing drumbeat in her arm. A chest tube snaked out from her side. A constant, uncomfortable reminder of the nicked lung. A friendly nurse, Maria, had assured her that Rex was safe. Tom and his wife were looking after him, spoiling him with steak and affection. The news was a small island of relief in an ocean of misery. On the second day, just as the fog was beginning to clear, a man in a tailored suit who did not look like a doctor walked into her room. He had a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes and a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. "Sarah Jenkins?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm David Davies, from the hospital's risk management division. I just wanted to come and see how you were doing." "Peachy?" Sarah rasped, her throat dry. Davies chuckled, a dry, papery sound. "Good, good, Spirit, that's what we like to see." He pulled a chair up to her bedside, the legs scraping on the linoleum. "Listen, Sarah, you're a valued employee, an excellent nurse, which is why this situation is so delicate." He opened his portfolio. "I've been reviewing the preliminary incident report, and I just have a few questions for our records, to make sure the workers' compensation claim is processed correctly." Sarah just nodded, a wave of weariness washing over her. "The report states you intervened in an altercation between your neighbor and your animal," Davies said, choosing his words with surgical precision. "It says you deliberately placed yourself between them, shielding the animal with your body." "He was going to kill Rex," she said, her voice flat. "I understand," Davies said, though his tone made it clear he didn't. "But from a liability standpoint, your actions could be viewed as reckless. You're an ER nurse. You know the risks better than anyone. To intentionally put yourself in harm's way, not for a person, but for a dog. You can see how our insurance carrier might look at that, can't you?" The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. They were going to fight her claim. They were going to argue that because she chose to save Rex, her injuries were her own fault. "It wasn't just a dog," Sarah said, her voice trembling with a mixture of pain and rising fury. "He's a retired Marine. He served this country for 8 years. He was my brother's partner." "A commendable sentiment, truly," Davies said, his smile unwavering. "But he is, legally speaking, property. And you are, legally speaking, a highly trained medical professional who willingly entered a dangerous situation. I'm just giving you a heads up, Sarah, to manage expectations. The hospital has to protect itself." He stood up, smoothing his tie. "You just focus on getting better." He left the room, leaving behind a silence that was more toxic than the antiseptic smell. Her heroism, her sacrifice, had been reduced to a balance sheet. She was a liability, a problem to be managed. Later that afternoon, her next visitor arrived. Officer Miller was a large man who seemed to have been poured into his uniform and left to set. He had a weary, cynical air about him, the look of a man counting the days to retirement. He didn't bother with pleasantries, just flipped open a notepad. "Sarah Jenkins? I'm here to take your official statement about the incident on Tuesday," he said, his voice a monotone drone. He didn't make eye contact, focusing instead on his pen. Sarah recounted the events, her voice weak but clear. She described Croft's escalating anger, his leap over the fence, his lunge toward Rex with the knife. Miller clicked his pen. "Okay, so, the dog, was it barking at him?" "No, he was just sitting there." Was it growling before Mr. Croft entered your yard? No, only after he jumped the fence and came at us with a knife, Sarah said, her frustration growing. Right, Miller said, scribbling a note. And you have a history with this neighbor, correct? The HOA has a record of his complaints about the dog. He has a history of harassing me, she corrected. His complaints were baseless. Miller sighed, a long, put-upon sound. Look, Ms. Jenkins, here's the situation. We arrested Mr. Croft at the scene. He's claiming self-defense. Says your dog was acting aggressively, that it lunged at him, and he pulled his knife to protect himself. Says you jumped in the middle of it all. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. I was stabbed 6 times. My lung was punctured. How is that self-defense? He says it was a chaotic situation. He was just flailing. Didn't mean to hurt you, Miller said with a shrug, as if reciting from a script. Right now, it's a messy situation. It's basically his word against yours about who the initial aggressor was. Without an independent witness to the moment of provocation, the DA has filed a single charge of simple assault. He'll likely get out on bail tomorrow. Simple assault. The words were a slap in the face. For attempted murder, for what felt like a hail of deadly blows, the system had responded with the legal equivalent of a parking ticket. You can't be serious, she whispered. I'm just telling you how it is, Miller said, finally looking at her. His eyes were devoid of sympathy. To him, she wasn't a hero or a victim. She was just another piece of paperwork in a never-ending pile of messy human disputes. You'll get your day in court. Now, if there's nothing else... He closed his notepad and lumbered out of the room, leaving Sarah feeling more violated than the knife wounds had made her. The final blow came not in person, but through the mail. A few days later, after she'd been discharged to the suffocating quiet of her home, a certified letter arrived. The return address was the Oak Meadows Homeowners Association. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. The language was cold, brutally bureaucratic. Official notice of bylaw violation. Pending removal hearing. Dear Ms. Jenkins, this letter serves as official notification that your property at 112 Willow Lane is in violation of the Oak Meadows covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Specifically, you are in violation of Bylaw 17A, which states, any animal residing within the community that is involved in a violent altercation, regardless of fault, shall be deemed a potential threat to the safety and tranquility of the community. The incident on the evening of May 23, 2025, involving your animal, a Belgian Malinois known as Rex, and Mr. People, Darren Croft, constitutes such a violent altercation. To safeguard the community, the board has voted to schedule a mandatory removal hearing. You are hereby ordered to appear before the board on Tuesday, May 30, 2025 at 7:00 p.m. The board will vote on the permanent and immediate removal of the animal from the Oak Meadows community. Failure to comply will result in significant daily fines and further legal action. We appreciate your cooperation in keeping Oak Meadows a safe place to live. Sincerely, the Board of Directors, Oak Meadows HOA. Karen Thompson, President. Sarah read the letter once, then twice. The words swam before her eyes. They weren't just failing her. They were actively punishing her for being a victim. They were using the attack she had suffered to protect Rexus, the justification to take him away from her. She crumpled the letter in her fist, a single, choked sob escaping her lips. She was wounded, betrayed by her employer, dismissed by the law, and now she was about to lose the last living piece of her brother. She slid down the wall in her hallway, pulling her knees to her chest, and for the first time since Michael's flag-draped casket had come home, Sarah Jenkins wept. She wept for her brother, for her own broken body, and for the crushing, overwhelming injustice of it all. She was utterly and completely alone. The first few days at home were a blur of pain management and despair. Every movement was a chore. The simple act of getting a glass of water felt like a marathon. Rex seemed to understand. He stayed glued to her side, a silent, furry nurse, resting his head on her lap whenever she sat down, his presence a warm, comforting weight against the cold dread that had settled in her heart. The eviction notice for Rex was a ticking clock, a constant reminder of her powerlessness. She'd called a lawyer, a man whose number she'd gotten from a friend. He was sympathetic but blunt. OA covenants are notoriously ironclad, Sarah, he'd said. They have their own little fiefdom. We can fight it, but it will be an uphill, expensive battle. a battle she couldn't afford physically, emotionally, or financially. Hope arrived in the form of a knock on her door. When she opened it, a young woman with bright, intelligent eyes and a determined set to her jaw stood on her porch. "Sarah Jenkins?" the woman asked. "My name is Jessica Ramirez. I'm a reporter with the Virginia Herald Online." Sarah's first instinct was to slam the door. The last thing she wanted was to talk to the media. "Please," Jessica said quickly, sensing her hesitation. "I'm not here about the police report. I read it, and it doesn't add up. Woman injured in neighbor dispute. It sounds like a scuffle over a hedge, but I heard from a source at the hospital about the extent of your injuries and about who your dog is. I think there's a real story here, and I don't think anyone is telling it." There was a sincerity in her voice that cut through Sarah's defensive shell. She was so tired of being misunderstood, of being reduced to a case file or a liability. She looked at Jessica, then back at Rex, who sat faithfully by her feet. What did she have left to lose? "Come in," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. For the next hour, sitting in her living room with Rex's head on her knee, Sarah told Jessica everything. She didn't just recount the attack, she shared the whole story. She talked about Michael, showing Jessica the framed photo on the mantle of a smiling young man in marine dress blues. She talked about what it was like to get that flag at Dover, about the crushing weight of it. She explained what Rex meant to her, not as a pet, but as a living legacy. Then, her voice hardening with an anger that had been simmering for days, she told Jessica about Mr. Davies and the hospital's veiled threats. She told her about Officer Miller's apathy and the insulting charge of simple assault. And finally, with trembling hands, she smoothed out the crumpled letter from the HOA and handed it to Jessica. Jessica read it, her eyes widening with each cold, bureaucratic phrase. She looked up from the letter, no longer a reporter sniffing out a story, but a human being filled with righteous indignation. "They can't do this," Jessica said, her voice low and fierce. "They cannot be allowed to do this." Jessica left with a full notebook, a copy of the HOA letter, and a fire in her belly. That evening, her article went live. The headline was a masterpiece of rage-inducing clarity. Erner stabbed. 6 times shielding her fallen brother's 9-war hero. Her hoe responds by trying to evict the dog. The story was accompanied by the photo of Michael in his dress blues and a heart-wrenching picture Jessica had snapped of Sarah on her couch, her arm in a sling, with Rex's head resting protectively on her lap. The internet, so often a cesspool of division and triviality, found a unifying cause. The story didn't just go viral, it detonated. It was shared on Facebook by military families, dog rescue groups, nurses' unions, and thousands of ordinary people who recognized profound injustice when they saw it. The link flooded Twitter, Reddit, and Instagram. The comment section was a torrent of fury and support. This is what's wrong with America. A hero gets stabbed and the soulless HOA attacks the victim. "I'm a vet. That canine has done more for this country than that entire HOA board combined. This is a disgrace. Officer Miller needs to be fired. Simple assault? For 6 stab wounds? Unbelievable. What hospital is this? Name and shame. How dare they threaten her workers' comp?" The digital firestorm quickly leapt into the real world. The Oak Meadows HOA Facebook page was inundated with so many 1-star reviews and furious comments that it was taken down within 3 hours. Karen Thompson's email and phone number were somehow leaked, and she was bombarded with messages calling for her resignation. The police department's non-emergency line was flooded with calls from across the country demanding answers about the handling of the case. Mr. Davies found his professional LinkedIn profile swarmed with angry comments. The antagonists, who had wielded their petty institutional power with such impunity, were suddenly facing a tidal wave of public rage they could not control or comprehend. They had poked a bear not just Sarah, but the entire collective conscience of a nation that still, deep down, believed in right and wrong. Thousands of miles away, on a dusty training ground at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole Gunny Evans was scrolling through his phone during a break. A link in a Marine veterans group chat caught his eye. The headline made him stop. He knew that name. Jenkins, he clicked. As he read Jessica Ramirez's article, a cold, quiet fury began to build in his chest. He saw the photo of Michael, the fresh-faced sergeant with a brilliant future, a kid he'd personally recommended for a meritorious promotion. He remembered the kid's fierce love for his canine partner, Rex. Then he read about the nurse sister, the one Michael always talked about with such pride. He read about the 6 stab wounds, the indifferent cop, the weaselly hospital administrator, and the final galling insult of the HOA letter. The words, "involved in a violent altercation, regardless of fault," seemed to burn on the screen. It was the language of cowards and bureaucrats, a language designed to punish the honorable and protect the craven. He thought of Michael Jenkins bleeding out on a dusty road, his last thoughts likely of his family and his brothers in arms. He thought of the promise they all made to each other, the unspoken covenant that transcended life and death, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. It wasn't just a motto to be tattooed on your arm. It was a verb. It was an action. Gunny Evans didn't shout. He didn't make a speech. His movements were calm and deliberate. He closed the article, opened a secure group chat that connected hundreds of active duty and veteran Marines from Michael's old Raider Battalion and its support network, and posted the link. Beneath it, he typed a simple, clear message. "They're trying to take Michael Jenkins's dog from his sister. After she took 6 knives for him. I'm driving to 112 Willow Lane, Oak Meadows, Virginia, tomorrow morning. I'll be there by 800, for those who are able." He hit send. He didn't need to say more. He knew his men. He knew the Corps. The promise had been made. It would be kept. The morning of the HOA hearing dawned gray and oppressive. The sky, the color of a fresh bruise. Sarah hadn't slept. She'd spent the night staring at the ceiling, the threatening letter on her nightstand, a symbol of her impending defeat. She felt sick with dread. In a few hours, a tribunal of her smug, self-important neighbors would formally vote to cast out the last piece of her brother. She hobbled to the kitchen, her body a symphony of aches, and made coffee. Rex shadowed her, sensing her distress, nudging her hand with his nose every few moments as if to say, "I'm here. We're together." She stood at her living room window, sipping the hot, bitter coffee, and stared out at the quiet street. It all looked so normal, so peaceful. It was a lie. Then she heard it, a low rumble, different from the usual morning traffic, a heavy-duty engine, a blue Ford F-150, the kind with military plates, pulled up and parked across the street. A man with a high and tight haircut and the unmistakable posture of a lifelong Marine got out. He didn't approach the house. He just leaned against his truck, folded his arms, and waited. Sarah frowned in confusion. A minute later, another truck, a silver Dodge Ram with a USMC decal on the back window, pulled in behind it. Then a Jeep Wrangler, then a sedan, and another. And another. They came in a steady, silent stream, filling every available parking space along the street. Men and women got out. Young men in their 20s with the lean, hungry look of active-duty infantry. Older men in their 40s and 50s, thicker around the middle but with the same ramrod, straight backs, and steady eyes. They were black, white, Hispanic, Asian. They wore jeans and work boots, polo shirts and baseball caps. They were contractors, IT specialists, cops, teachers, and fathers. But today, they were all one thing. They were Marines. They didn't speak. They didn't hold signs. They didn't chant. They simply assembled. They lined the sidewalk in front of her house. They filled her driveway, standing in loose, informal ranks. They formed a silent, unmovable wall of solidarity. Within 20 minutes, there were 50, then 80, then over 100. The quiet suburban street had been transformed into a staging ground for a legion of guardians. Sarah's knees felt weak. She gripped the windowsill for support, tears blurring her vision. A towering figure detached himself from the group and walked up her path. He was older than the rest, his face a roadmap of hard-won wisdom. It was Gunny Evans. He saw the official HOA notice still taped to her door, a flimsy piece of paper against the backdrop of this human fortress. With 2 fingers, he gently peeled it from the door, folded it, and tucked it into his pocket as if it were a piece of trash. He knocked softly. When Sarah opened the door, her face streaked with tears. He gave her a small, kind smile. He didn't offer pity or platitudes. "Ma'am," he said, his deep voice rumbling with quiet authority. "We're Michael's brothers. We heard you had a bit of a situation here. We're here to help. What needs fixing?" Before she could even answer, the Marines began to move with quiet, disciplined purpose. A team of 4, who apparently did landscaping in their civilian lives, pulled a mower and edger from a truck bed and started on her overgrown lawn. 2 others began inspecting the fence Croft had broken, taking measurements and making a list of materials. Another group began a slow, silent patrol around the perimeter of the property. They weren't protesting. They were taking over the problem. They were fixing it. At precisely 6:50 p.m., 10 minutes before the scheduled hearing, a pristine Lexus sedan purred down the street and stopped abruptly. Karen Thompson got out, dressed in a sharp pantsuit, clutching a leather portfolio. She took in the scene, the scores of silent Marines, the lawn being mowed, the fence being repaired, and her face, a mask of smug authority, slackened with shock. She took a hesitant step forward, as if to assert her non-existent authority. 3 of the larger Marines standing at the end of the driveway turned their heads in unison and simply looked at her. They didn't speak. They didn't threaten. They just looked. It was a gaze forged in places Karen Thompson couldn't even imagine, a look of profound, unshakable resolve. Karen paled. Her carefully constructed world of bylaws and violations had just collided with a world of brotherhood and blood oaths, and it shattered instantly. She took a step back, then another, before scurrying back to her Lexus and speeding away. A police cruiser made a slow pass down the street. Sarah recognized Officer Miller behind the wheel. He saw the crowd, saw the quiet efficiency, saw the dozens of pairs of eyes tracking his every move. He did not stop. He did not get out. He just kept on driving until he was out of sight. The system, which had felt so monolithic and unbeatable when it was bearing down on one wounded woman, had proven to be laughably fragile and cowardly in the face of a unified community. Standing on her porch, with Rex leaning against her leg and Gunny Evans standing guard, Sarah Jenkins watched the quiet army that had come to her rescue. She was not a liability. She was not a case file. She was family. And the United States Marine Corps always takes care of its family. The image of over 100 Marines silently tending to a wounded nurse's yard was more powerful than any protest. Jessica Ramirez was on the scene, her camera capturing the quiet dignity of the gathering. Her follow-up story, complete with photos of the Marines at work and the sight of Karen Thompson fleeing in her car, became the #1 trending topic in the country. The story was no longer just about injustice. It was about the profound, awe-inspiring power of loyalty. The fallout for the antagonist was swift and brutal. The district attorney's office, facing a national firestorm of ridicule and accusations of incompetence, held a press conference the very next day. The DA, his face grim, announced that after a thorough review of new evidence and witness statements, the charges against Darren Croft were being upgraded to 2 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and 1 count of felony witness intimidation. The Oak Meadows police chief followed with his own press conference, announcing that Officer Miller had been placed on paid administrative leave pending a full and transparent internal affairs investigation into his handling of the case. The message was clear. Apathy would no longer be tolerated. The national corporation that managed the Oak Meadows HOA went into full damage control. They issued a formal public apology to Sarah Jenkins, calling the actions of their local board abhorrent and unacceptable. Karen Thompson and the entire HOA board were summarily fired. A check for $10,000 was overnighted to Sarah for pain and suffering, and all notices, fines, and actions against her and Rex were permanently expunged. Perhaps most satisfyingly, the CEO of the hospital where Sarah worked, a man she had never even seen, called her personal cell phone. He stumbled through a profuse apology, assuring her that Mr. Davies had misspoken and had been severely reprimanded. He promised her that not only would her workers' compensation claim be approved without question, but all of her medical bills, co-pays, and future physical therapy would be covered entirely by the hospital. "You are a hero, Sarah," the CEO said, his voice dripping with newfound sincerity. "And we are proud to have you as part of our family." Sarah listened to it all with a sense of detached vindication. The apologies were welcome, the corrections were just, but the wounds, both physical and psychological, remained. The real healing came not from the crumbling of the systems that failed her, but from the community that had risen to support her. The GoFundMe that Gunny Evans had started with a modest goal of $10,000 for her medical expenses had become a phenomenon. Donations poured in from all 50 states and a dozen foreign countries. Within 48 hours, it had surpassed $500,000. The comments were a balm on her soul. From an Army family to a Marine family, we've got your 6. This nurse and her dog represent the best of us. Thank you for reminding us what loyalty looks like. The Marines didn't vanish after that first day. They organized. A schedule was made. One of them, a tech guru, came and upgraded her home security system. Another, a chef, dropped off pre-made meals for the week. They took turns walking Rex while Sarah recovered, driving her to her physical therapy appointments, or sometimes just sitting with her on the porch, sharing stories about their friend, her brother, Michael. They filled her quiet house with life, laughter, and the unwavering certainty that she would never be alone again. 1 year later, the Virginia sun was warm and gentle on Sarah's face. The scars on her back and arm had faded to pale, silvery lines, permanent reminders of a promise kept. She walked with no limp, her body strong again. At her side, trotting with the proud gait of a dog who knows he is cherished, was Rex. His muzzle was a little grayer, his steps a little slower, but his amber eyes were bright and content. They were in a sprawling public park, where a crowd had gathered under a large pavilion. Banners around the pavilion read, "The Michael Jenkins Foundation, Second Annual Pause for Heroes Placement Day." Sarah, no longer just an ER nurse, stood at a podium. The foundation, funded by the astonishing outpouring of generosity she had received, had become her new mission. It was a thriving nonprofit that rescued retired military and police nines, providing them with medical care and pairing them with Gold Star families and disabled veterans who needed a loyal partner to help them navigate the world. It also provided a legal defense fund to fight the kind of housing discrimination she and Rex had faced. Gunny Evans and a dozen of the Marines from her street were in the front row, their faces beaming with pride. Sarah looked out at the crowd, at the families waiting to meet their new four-legged partners, and she smiled. "A year ago," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I learned a hard lesson. I learned that the systems we build to protect us can sometimes be cold and blind and broken. But I also learned something far more powerful. I learned that a promise is stronger than paper. I learned that loyalty is a living, breathing thing. And I learned that the motto my brother lived by, Semper Fidelis, isn't just a phrase for the United States Marine Corps. It's a promise to all of us. A promise to be always faithful to the people who need us, to stand in the breach when someone falls, and to never, ever leave anyone behind." She gestured to a beautiful German shepherd sitting patiently by the stage. Today, this hero, Canine Officer Bella, is going home with the family of a fallen police officer. She will be their guardian, their comfort, and their living link to the hero they lost. She will be their promise, kept. The applause was thunderous. Sarah stepped away from the podium, her heart full. The horror of that spring evening would never fully leave her, but it no longer defined her. The violence of one man had been answered by the goodness of thousands. The failure of the system had been redeemed by the strength of a community. Her brother's legacy was not one of violence and loss, but of the unbreakable, healing power of a bond between a girl, her dog, and the family she never knew she had.